welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Got a lot of you on today, so hopefully we'll have a really fruitful discussion, hopefully a good debate as well. So just to introduce myself, I'm Lily, so I'm content manager at Triptease, and I'm the author of the report that this webinar is based on, and this is Charlie with me, so co-founder and chief tease at Triptease. So this webinar came about, this is part of our new Spotlight On series, which every month we'll be doing a kind of deep dive into really interesting industry debate or topic or something that keeps coming up with our clients. And then following the publication of the report, we'll be doing a webinar where we'll be answering the questions and conversations that have arisen as a result of the report. So I'm here today with Charlie, as I said, and we're from Triptease. So Charlie's just going to quickly introduce himself and take us through what Triptease does.
Hello, hi, yes, I'm the chief tease at Triptease. The 30-second overview, because this is not why you joined today, is that Triptease, we work with hotels to help drive direct bookings. So we sit across a hotel's website and booking engine and deliver personalized messaging that enhances the guest experience and increases bookings on the website. So those may be with nudge messages that help move people along. Price check, which is something we invented a few years ago, where someone's on the hotel website and we just deliver a price comparison, and also a front desk, which is a live chat built specifically for hoteliers. So that's an overview of us. Really, I guess our focus is helping hotels get direct bookings. And one of the reasons why the wholesaler issue came up and was highlighted was because we, with price check in particular, we're often checking rates around the web on behalf of hotels. And we then can monitor what the conversion rate is on hotel websites. And we saw that when wholesalers are passing on rates and hotels are being undercut online, it can have a really big impact on conversion. So that's why we thought we really need to look at the wholesaler issue more closely. So hence today.
Perfect, thanks Charlie. So in terms of the structure today's going to take, we're going to, I'm sure many of you might have seen the report and that's why you're here maybe, so we won't be following that to the letter. We'll just 20 minutes of kind of discussion of the topic, the survey we conducted, and add in some extra data that we didn't manage to fit into the final report. And then we'll be addressing the questions that some of you submitted before the webinar as well in that section. And then for the second half of the webinar, so kind of final 20 minutes, we'll be taking any questions that might come up during the webinar. So please do just submit in the little, on your GoToWebinar control panel, you should have a little questions chat box that you should be able to submit during the webinar, and at some points we'll be asking questions to you, so it'd be great if you could write a little response.
And I should say, questions and also comments and vehement disagreements where you think we've got something wrong, please tell us. I know we've got a few wholesalers on today, so equally, you guys are much more expert in the ways and wherefores of how your businesses operate, so feel free to correct us and let us know where we stray.
Perfect. Okay, let's get started. Excuse me. So we're broadly talking about the issue of wholesalers passing on rates that weren't meant to be passed to OTAs, such as a MoMA, but many other sites like that in a kind of unbundled form, and this then undercuts the best available rate of a hotel that they might have given to the OTAs that they contract with, such as Booking.com or Expedia. So as Charlie said, we're addressing this because it comes up time and again with our clients, but also just industry press, and something is a lot of chatter about it. So for our report that some of you may have seen, but if not, it's just Spotlight on Wholesalers. You'll be able to find it on our website. We spoke to 50 hotels, a mixture of clients and non-clients, and these were global, so ranging from a couple of rooms right up to 2,000 plus. But before we get into any of that, it took me a long time to understand this issue, so I was wondering, Charlie, you could just elucidate a little bit what we mean by this issue.
Okay, so as you know, hotels guard very carefully the prices they're charging online. We find that if a hotel is being undercut online, then the conversion rate on the hotel's website goes down by around 30%. So maintaining parity, or at least not being undercut, is really important for hotels who want to convert people on their website. But also important for hotels is to fill up their beds and to know they're going to be filling their beds. And wholesalers are fabulous at taking on an allocation for the year and helping hotels fill their beds. And obviously the contracts that wholesalers tend to have with hotels require that they keep rates bundled up They don't unbundle and they don't discount and undercut hotels because hotels don't want their rates passed on. However, sadly, over the last few years, increasingly hotels have found that wholesalers are unbundling and passing on rates. And it feels like this is a problem that's got much greater. Even though there are some wholesalers who definitely seem to be taking a stand and playing by the book, it feels like overall hoteliers are feeling that the amount of unbundling and passing on and then being undercut, and particularly we happen to have a MoMA we've cited in the report because it's the single brand that's most mentioned to us as an OTA that is receiving unbundled rates. It seems to be a problem that's getting worse. So yeah, that's basically what's happening. The wholesalers are, in a sense, breaking their contracts, passing on their rates to third parties. And the real challenge for hotels is, unlike a relationship they might have with Expedia or Booking.com, where they can call up that OTA because they have a business relationship with them, if the wholesaler is passing on rates to a third-party OTA with whom the hotel does not have a relationship, then it's impossible to get that third party, for example, a MoMA, to take any action and to stop selling on these hotel rooms, because ultimately, if a MoMA buys the rooms for $90 and sells them for $100, you know, a MoMA's buying something, they can do what they like with it. Really, the issue starts from when a wholesaler breaks a contract.
Yeah, and that's something that came up both in talking to hotels and in this research was there's confusion around who kind of a MoMA are really and how they function as an OTA if they're not contracting directly with hotels. So I was wondering, one question that we had submitted previous to the webinar was, will Expedia and Booking.com, if they aren't already, will they begin to sell to a MoMA as well? And will this business model become more important?
So we don't know of, I mean, it's a slightly opaque world. We don't know of Expedia and Booking.com passing on inventory to a third party like a MoMA. Personally, I don't actually see why that would make much sense for Booking and Expedia, because they're not buying pre-allocated set of rooms, and also they would not want to be undercut online. So I don't think that those guys are passing off their rates. I do think we have seen some hotels report to us that, for example, with Expedia, I think, that sometimes they may be buying in extra additional inventory from third parties, but that's just, you know, something's reported. I don't know necessarily that that's against hoteliers' contracts with the OTA. I don't know that it's a bad thing. I'm not sure that it is or should be seen as that, but I suspect that something's out there. Someone actually, one of the comments I noticed somewhere where the report was written about was someone said, wow, this report must have been written by someone who's very pro-OTA, which is not something we're frequently accused of, but it's worth touching on. So I do think that this is, you know, one of the rare instances perhaps where hotels and OTAs have a very aligned interest. It is in a hotel's interest and it is in Booking.com's interest that if the two of them have the same price, they don't want a third party to be undercutting either of them. So there is a good alignment, and I think that's a good thing, right? We've spent the last 3 years talking about the war for direct bookings between hotels and OTAs, and so if this turns out to be an area of common ground, perhaps even one that OTAs and hotels might police together, then I think that could be good for the industry. But I digress.
Yeah, no, we'll get onto that in a bit later on. But one of the interesting things, so just touching on the survey we conducted, was that so when this report was written about and some of the comments that Charlie's just mentioned, there was a feeling that there was obviously a lot of the hotels we'd interviewed were speaking fairly negatively about either wholesalers or a MoMA. But interestingly, if you look at the kind of numbers, so there are more people who answered our survey that described the problem as significant for them than actually described themselves as feeling negatively towards wholesalers. So it was a minority of the respondents said they had a negative attitude towards wholesalers in general, but around 75% of them said that this was a significant problem for them. So it's that interesting thing of this is probably pointing towards being very reliant or very grateful for the work wholesalers do within their agreed remit, but then realising that this, as Charlie said, is a problem that's kind of beginning to creep up.
Yeah, there's some sharp practices going on, like sharp elbows, and I think really, yeah, we should also get to be very clear that this isn't about anti-wholesaler contracts. I think wholesalers have a great value add to hotels, so long as they're sticking to the contracts they've agreed to, because otherwise they definitely can have a negative impact.
Yeah. So as we've spoken about, this is basically having a really negative impact on both relationships between hotels and wholesalers, but also the guest experience as well. You just have to Google really the word AMOMA, and it's kind of, you know, disaster stories of getting to a hotel and the reservation not being there and that kind of thing. So it's having a real impact on guest experience, which is never a good thing for hotels looking to increase bookings. So we've kind of gone through what's going on and why it's harmful. And our survey kind of made clear that hotels are really aware of it and really kind of getting to the end of their tether. But there was a sizable chunk of the respondents who still weren't sure how to identify the wholesaler at all, which is a real issue if hotels as an industry are going to think about tackling this.
So what's the simple way to identify which wholesalers pass on your rates?
Yeah, Charlie.
Oh, okay. And it is relatively simple, which is you find the rate on the third-party OTA. So let's say you're being undercut on a site like AMOMA. You book it and use a magical, fantastical name or your own name in the booking. Let's say Joe Blogs. And then when the booking comes through to your central reservation system, and you see a booking and the name of a guest as Joe Blogs, the person who passed you that reservation is obviously the wholesaler who had passed on the rate to a third party. So basically, you're creating a reservation under a fake name or under a specific name, and then identifying that guest when they come through. And that's the basic practice which hotels are using. I'd say generally what we find is there's a flurry of activity. So hotels, when they get really angry about this, they will go and do a number of different bookings and then sort of pick up the phone and yell at the wholesaler who's passed on the rate. There are some hotels now who are starting to do this just on a consistent basis. So they've allocated a budget and they're booking 2 or 3 rooms a month, every month, and identifying who passed this on, and so they can just keep track. But I think it's a little ad hoc, I'd say, in the industry. But yeah, that's how you catch it.
Cool. And that was for the 39 or so people who were saying that they would know how to go about finding those people. This is exactly what they were saying. So got some quotes just from the survey that we did. We book a test reservation, identify which wholesaler it came from, then send that reservation to the wholesaler with a request to stop the practice. Then we try to book and catch them, but it's time consuming and a pain. We've been asked to speak more slowly, we've been told. So we're trying to measure ourselves. It's a very emotional topic.
Just fast focus.
Sorry, we are. Thank you for pointing it out. And do let us know if there's issues with the sound or anything like that. And then people saying, we don't have a solution, it's too difficult, a waste of our time. And then someone else talking about how they do if a guest mentions they booked through AMOMA, which I imagine would be fairly infrequent, but I don't know where a guest tells you where they booked from, we would investigate and bring it up with the wholesaler. However, the wholesaler never seems to have a solution. They blame the agencies they distribute to, and they refuse to take responsibility.
Yeah, and I think this is what's causing a lot of the angst is, I know hotels report to us that they're identifying which wholesaler has passed on the rate. They're calling up that wholesaler. They're getting someone on the other end of the phone saying, well, really sorry, it must be a mistake, I don't know how it happened. And then they go and see the same behavior happen again and again. So they feel a little bit cheated by their partners. And that just creates animosity and anguish. And we've seen a lot of hotels starting to just cancel wholesaler contracts. Even some big groups just saying, that's it, we're done with wholesalers. We're going to turn them all off and see if we can get the bookings another way, which is a shame because I think ultimately everyone can see the value of an efficient and well-working wholesale system.
Yeah. So at this point, we were interested if people would be willing to tell us which wholesalers, either A, you keep having this issue with kind of a worst offender of the wholesale partners you have, and also wholesalers that really do kind of keep to your contracts and aren't engaging in this behaviour, because this isn't about tarring everyone with the same brush, because I do think there is a spectrum of how people are behaving on it.
Yes, so here it is. We will release the results. Please write in the comments which wholesalers you find are bad offenders and which wholesalers you find are never offend or you feel you have a great relationship with and they wouldn't do this. Yeah. We would love to see if there's any consistency. I suspect actually the truth is it probably varies quite a lot regionally, geographically. Probably literally comes down to the team of people, your account manager, wherever you're based as a hotel, but it would be interesting to see if there are any specific like standout good or bad behaviours.
And do feel free to send that privately. You don't have to send it where everyone can see it.
Is that in, oh yeah, here we
Yeah,
go. Sorry,
just below
thank
the
you very
chat.
much. And equally, if this works as a system, then we may have a fourth solution for managing wholesalers, which is if you guys do feedback which ones you've had a problem with or which ones have been great, we will gladly publish a list every month and try to get always at least say 100 hotels to give us that list so we can just track it as an industry because it feels like it's time to try and nip this one in the bud.
Perfect. So yeah, if you could keep those coming in throughout the webinar, but just going back to some of those quotes I was reading out and the kind of it's time-consuming and a waste of our time, painful, those kind of words, you do almost wonder why hotels are still working with wholesale partners, and this is something that came up a lot in the comments around the report. So people kind of falling into two camps in the questions they submitted, either for the webinar or the comments they were making. So number one, why bother at all? Why not just switch off completely? And number two, why does it matter if it's happening? So if it is, surely A, these sites are quite small, like a moment, can't be a lot of bookings that come through there. And also, doesn't better parity mean more bookings for OTAs? Is something that came in.
Okay, wait. There's a bunch of questions.
There are a bunch of questions.
First one.
Yeah.
So the first one was, sorry, why keep working with them?
Yeah.
Oh, I think we've already identified, right? There's a whole bunch of value that wholesalers can give, commitment to number of rooms, and that can be very reassuring. I think in particular for certain types of properties, and I'd probably say vacations in far off parts of the country, wholesaler can be especially useful compared to if you have a in-city property. So if you are a hotel in central London or in New York, probably your reliance or your need for the wholesalers is lower than if you are a vacation property on the Côte d'Azur, because if you're in a central city, the ability to switch to perhaps more OTA bookings or to drive more direct bookings is easier than if perhaps you're in part of Spain, which has traditionally always been booked through travel aid tour operators. So I don't think switching off is the right solution for all hotels. We've definitely heard of some hotels where they feel comfortable, and generally that's because they were in cities where they've switched off and then they found they were still able to fill the rooms. So yeah, I think really that comes down to the hotel. I think what I would say is that if you're not prepared as a hotel to switch off certain wholesalers, then it's unlikely that you'll ever fix this issue. If you're not prepared to state that as a threat to a wholesaler and then cut the business from that wholesaler if they continually offend. If you don't do that, then there's no reason why the wholesaler won't carry on. And that's something that I think that's worth mentioning is we've evolved to a point where as part of building annual budgets, right? If you're working at a wholesaler and you're building your budgets, you're budgeting in that you're going to be able to pass on rooms. So to make your profits for the year, to hit your numbers for the year, you've now budgeted in this behavior. So it's really hard behavior to crack because it's now part of the system. Which is why I think you have to be able to ultimately have the ability to walk away if you had to. And that's not from all wholesalers, right? It's from identifying which ones are bad offenders and working with the good ones.
Yeah.
So was that question? Sorry, next one.
Why does it matter if it's happening? Because doesn't better parity mean more bookings for OTAs?
Does better parity mean more bookings for OTAs? It may do, yes, it wouldn't surprise me, right? So if Booking.com is being undercut by Mona, I imagine the bookings on Booking.com go down. So yes, it would benefit the OTAs if there's better parity, but also at the same time, without question, and we know this because in the last 4 months we would have ran 200-300 million price searches for hotels, and we know that if the hotel is being undercut somewhere online, guests find out about it, and the hotel's conversion on their own website goes down by about 30%. So it may be better for OTAs to fix this. It's definitely better for hotels to fix this.
Yeah. So yeah, next slide. Here are a few more results of the survey which were in the report. So the first we've kind of touched on already when we talked about that fewer hotels have a negative attitude towards wholesalers than would describe this as a problem. But the second two are interesting, and Charlie, I know you have some thoughts on my methodology.
Oh yeah, I used to run a market research agency, so I'm always slightly nervous of every survey I ever see, every statistic that I ever read. I'm always a little bit skeptical. Because this one was interesting because it says so 21 out of 50 hotels, so was that 42% of hotels, have a policy of cancelling contracts with misbehaving partners. So, I mean, that's an interesting one because we're focusing on the 42%. Actually, another way of looking at it is that 58% are not cancelling contracts even if the partner's misbehaving. And my guess is, as a result, partners will carry on, as I just said. The second one, I can't read there, 37 out of 50 would be prepared to cut off all wholesale business. I mean, that's a little bit like, you know, there are ways you could ask me a question, would I be prepared to jump out of a 2-story window? And the answer is yes, if the building was on fire. So the fact that someone's prepared to, if in really bad circumstances, doesn't mean that they're actually doing it today. So, yeah, just a little bit of nuance in the numbers, I think. But anyway, these are the responses.
Yeah. So I do need to work on my question asking for the next report, but that was one out of all of them, so I think we did all right. It did illuminate, however, that last point where would you be prepared if the problem got bad enough to switch off your business? And so the responses we got as to why they would do that were interesting in themselves. So one response saying they would. I rely heavily on an OTA business and cannot afford losing page placement due to parity issues. So that's a hotelier from the US, mid-size.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So if, I think Expedia announced a couple of years ago some of the ranking factors they use. And certainly one of the major ranking factors on Expedia.com is how well does this hotel, you know, in New York, when it's ranked, how well does it convert for Expedia.com? And if it's not converting very well because you're always being undercut on another website, then you will go down the ranking on Expedia.
Yeah.
That's black and white. I don't know whether that means you go down one place or whether it means you go down 20 places, but I think there is probably an effect.
Yeah. Another one who said they would switch off business. This is a hotelier from Monaco, quite a small hotel. Rate parity is critical in the process of creating the best customer digital experience. We simply need to offer it no matter how, and if that means cutting contracts with historical partners because they can't control their distribution, then hoteliers will have to control it themselves. So that's again focusing on the guest experience. And also a point that these are historical partners, so we have shifted from a place where hotels would maybe relying much more heavily on wholesale business for those just filling the beds, to whether that relationship can keep up with digital travel.
Cool. I'm just going to stop a second.
Yeah.
Have we had any disagreements? Any people who tell us we got it all wrong yet? Because we're very happy to deal with those as we go along. I know we've got questions later.
No.
Okay. We'll address comments later.
Feel free to disagree. Someone who said they would never switch off wholesale business. Our hotels still need the wholesale market. We're not a large chain, and wholesale helps provide international marketing that we may not be able to afford without it. So that's again a US hotelier, fairly small. And then another person who would not be prepared to. Either the business will be booked by Booking.com or a wholesaler. Personally, I would prefer the wholesaler, and that's a French hotel.
And I think we find that a lot in general. Hotels tend to have, despite these issues, they tend to have a more favourable perception of wholesalers than OTAs often when it comes to sharp practices.
Mm-hmm.
This is by no means only happening in the wholesale market.
Yeah. So then, to go on to the next slide. So these are a few of the quotes that came out of the report with regards to wholesale and this whole issue. So we probably don't have time to go through all of these in detail, but just wanted to address that we weren't at all in this report deliberately ignoring positive quotes about wholesalers. It's simply that these were the ones that came in, and I think it's slightly self-fulfilling in that people who are filling in a wholesale survey are likely to have a bit of an axe to grind about wholesalers. But it is worth pointing out that the vast majority of those 50 gave responses along these lines. So continued tolerance is allowing wholesalers to cheat and win a game in which we should set the rules. So my personal favourite is probably the one from the Scottish hotel there, third one down. If a MoMA, etc., had any balls or business ethics, they would contract directly with hotels and secure a fair pricing deal.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I think that's unfair. And the reason I think it's unfair is ultimately a MoMA is a business, and a MoMA have worked out an opportunity that they are taking advantage of. So, in fact, arguably, they've got the balls to go and do this and operate in a new way. I don't blame them for what they're doing because they're a third party, they're managing to get hold of rates and they're managing to sell them. It's not illogical, in many ways it's not immoral for what they're doing, right? The problem is if you've got a wholesaler who's passing on rates, that's where the issue is. So
that was something that came up, a question that was asked is whose responsibility is it to control that downstream distribution?
And the answer is it's the wholesalers.
There we go. Right. So I was wondering if we could ask the audience at this point if they could share how they feel, because if there are completely differing opinions to these ones, are they a really important part of your business mix? And do you value, for example, the kinds of guests they bring in that perhaps our survey results you didn't feel addressed your personal viewpoint on them? It would be great if we could hear that.
Yes, in fact, I'm almost certain that my hypothesis would be that I'm more likely to get a guest who is appropriate and right and knows what they're getting with my property if they book through a wholesaler, through a tour operator, through a wholesaler. I think often that would be a better fit guest than an OTA guest might be. It's hard to be sure. I don't know. I've done no research, but that would be my hunch.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's real value there.
Yeah. So having gone through the problem and attitudes towards it, we haven't quite touched on yet, apart from that, the booking and complaining, the solutions that, as we see them, as kind of where we could go from here. So I put on the slide here the 3 approaches that we kind of concluded our report with, that hotels can choose one or a combination of these paths. So that first, booking, complaining, keep that cycle going. Second is what we've seen some people doing is having quite a methodical, we'll give you 1 strike and then we'll terminate you if we see you doing it again. And then the third one, which is dynamic pricing. So the majority of our respondents fell into the first 2 camps. I think there were 2 maybe that mentioned dynamic pricing as a response.
Yeah, and the warn and terminate, I think is particularly interesting. So if, for example, you operate currently with 7 wholesalers, then one strategy I've heard work for one hotel group was to look at the wholesaler business, identify 3 of them that they felt were definitely delivering good quality business, like the best, give 2 of them a contract and say to those 2, the second that we catch you passing on rates, undercutting us, we're going to drop you for number 3 because we're equally happy to go with number 3. So basically it's a very clear change in the way we're operating, and we're going to be really strict, and we're going to set guidelines, and if we catch you, you're off, because we're very comfortable that the 3rd or the 4th wholesaler that we also have on our potential books is ready to work with us and won't do this. And I think that kind of clarity of this is how this relationship's going to work can really help.
Yeah, I think we had a comment in from Claire.
Here we go. Your theory of making a Joe Bloggs booking isn't as straightforward as that, considering the terms and conditions of prepayment by third-party agents, sometimes a cancellation fee for making cancellations. I'm reluctant to even start a booking in fear they will whack the cancellation fee afterwards. Oh, that's a very good point. So let me just be clear. So maybe when I read it, I wasn't clear enough. So the comment was booking, for example, on a MoMA, seeing the booking come through, the problem is you can't then cancel the booking, because if you cancel with, for example, a MoMA, I believe there's a cancellation fee, or there may be. So actually, the way I see hotels do it is they book the room, they pay the $100 to book the room, and let's say $80 of that is kind of, in a sense, coming back to the hotel anyway. They just don't bother cancelling, or rather they often can't cancel. So I'm afraid it costs you money to do this. I think rarely are you able to cancel for exactly these kind of reasons, because otherwise hotels would do it and cancel all the time. So yeah, it's not as simple as I was first suggesting. You have to pay the money, you have to just suck it up. It's the cost of checking up on your wholesalers. Yeah.
And I think that thing about the cost, both the time and the monetary cost of doing that, is why the first 2 solutions, they do have a kind of strongly negative. There's kind of a bit of an air of threat hanging over the relationship. If you do this, we're going to make you do this, or I'm losing money. So that's why the 3rd solution, the dynamic pricing one, kind of came about as perhaps the most long-term and sustainable.
Yes, certainly, and it feels like also some of the larger wholesalers have actually really got a handle on this themselves. So, for example, I'm going to get it wrong, Hotel Beds, I think, and Core now have dynamic pricing contracts. So if you operate a dynamic pricing model with a wholesaler, then it's far less likely that they're going to be able to significantly undercut the best available rate when they pass on, if they were to pass on to a third party. So having dynamic pricing gives you some protection. And most of the wholesalers, particularly the larger ones, now have that ability. And it's something that you should be aiming to insist on, I think would be my opinion, if possible, in a contract. And if you've got wholesalers who don't allow dynamic pricing, then maybe it's time to go and look at others who do offer it. But certainly it is out there. I think most hotels just aren't yet taking advantage of it. Mm-hmm. But it certainly would reduce the extent to which rates are being unbundled and passed on.
And one question that came in prior to the webinar was something that I certainly hadn't anticipated, but someone was suggesting as a potential solution the idea of blockchain technology. And so I was wondering, I think there's probably quite a few people on the webinar who haven't come across this. I certainly hadn't. So I was wondering if, Charlie, you could give an idea of your understanding.
Okay, a 2-minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, the question was, could you use blockchain technology to better manage wholesalers? My brief answer is no, I don't think so, though I may be missing something, and perhaps whoever had the question had a specific solution in mind. So blockchain is what Bitcoin runs on. So Bitcoin is a form of currency, and blockchain is basically the distributed ledger that says who owns how much Bitcoin in that particular instance. So the idea of a distributed ledger is that rather than one person somewhere, writing down who owns what, everybody, in fact, well, millions of computers around the world have a copy of that ledger, and it updates automatically every time there's a transaction. So the theory, I guess, would be that if you had a distributed ledger running between the hotels and the wholesalers, and then also people making a purchase, that it would be possible maybe for the hotel to identify when bookings happen and who they happen through. I think it falls down because ultimately most people today are not buying anything, full stop, with Bitcoin. When I say most people, 99.9% of people. And I think that as soon as you've got an external system working with an internal system like that, the point at which the transaction happens, all the information is lost anyway. So even if a wholesaler has a distributed ledger with a hotel, I think that the fact that they take payment over a credit card means that the existence of a blockchain ledger actually doesn't help. So that's my take on whether that would help. I'm very happy to be told I've missed something, but that's probably all we need to talk about.
Yeah.
On that one.
Okay, so that's kind of our run through of our findings from the report and addressing the questions that were asked already. But before we kind of get into our audience Q&A, I have been told strongly by our events team to make sure we mention the Direct Booking Summit, which is happening in a couple of weeks now in New York, and then a couple of weeks after that in Barcelona. And on your screen there, you can see Spotlight 30, which is a discount code for attendees of the webinar. So I was wondering, Charlie, if you could just quickly explain what the summit is.
Oh, Direct Booking Summit. So we held the first one last year, and I can't tell you how many people came up to me afterwards and said, this is the best hotel event I've ever been to. So it's like completely not a TripTease event. Yeah. It is just lots of different hotels sharing their experiences of what they've done, what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked in driving direct bookings. So a day and a half, 2-day event, Europe or America, just focused on how to drive direct bookings. If that's what you're interested in, then I highly recommend you come because it's a great place. Everything is just focused on tactical tips and takeaways, things you can go and do, drive direct. Yeah. But enough of the sales pitch. Over to the questions. So there was one comment which was dynamic pricing can still lead to rate parity issues because wholesalers are requiring a discount of the best available rate. That is a good point. Well made. Thank you for picking that one up. I think dynamic still reduces the extent to which the discounts are so large that they get passed on to third parties. But you're right. It doesn't eradicate the issue. Mm-hmm. Meta searchers have to join the hotels into leaving these rogue sites out. How can we stop a MoMA from buying brand name keywords on Google? Whew, yeah, that's a tough one. I'm afraid I can't see any solution for that. If Google's a platform, a meta search site, their promise to the consumer, in a sense, well, maybe not Google. Let's pick Kayak or Trivago. Yeah. Their promise to the consumer is, we're looking at TripAdvisor, we're looking at every single rate out there on the web, and we're going to tell you which one's the cheapest. For them to live up to their brand promise, they have to be listing sites that have discounts. So as much as a hotel could theoretically try to put pressure on TripAdvisor, hey, we don't want to list on TripAdvisor if you're going to list these rates, I suspect TripAdvisor will give you a short shrift to that because they have a contract, in a sense, with the consumer to find the best rates out there. Sorry, not the news you wanted to hear, but I think that's...
I think it all comes back to it has to be stemming the tide of those rates ending up on the sites to begin with. I think post that, it's kind of patching things that we might not be able to patch.
Yeah. What is your take on wholesalers claiming they cannot buy into dynamic pricing due to products in brochures? Ooh, that's a good one.
Question.
I hope I was clear on that. So wholesalers saying they can't do dynamic rates because they need to put prices in brochures. I don't have a good answer to that. Do you? I think my temptation would be to see if you can find some wholesalers who are being more amenable to dynamic rates. I've not had that question. I'm afraid I don't have a solution.
Do any of the wholesalers on the webinar care to give an answer?
Or if you're a hotelier and you've experienced that pushback, we'd love to hear and share your thoughts. Please do type it in. Expedia are famous for scraping rates across the board for hotels and are quick to advise hotels with which they have contracts of any rate disparity disputes. Is this another audit check which hotels can use? Yeah, I think absolutely. If you do have a relationship with an OTA who is checking rates in third-party locations for you, and they can alert you when you're being undercut, I suspect that is really useful. The comment there said that Expedia do that. I am not sure about other OTAs, but yeah, I mean, we know that hotels get a lot of value out of when we provide data, because we're constantly, as I say, we're checking rates, and we then say to the hotel, someone searched on your hotel site yesterday, here's what they looked for, and by the way, you were being undercut in these places. And we know that that is something that's really valuable. I do think hotels are often surprised at just how frequently they're being undercut. I think often, even like little things, we'll often find that a hotel is getting undercut because they left open a rate code on an OTA from Valentine's Day, and they just forgot to close it out 6 months later. So there's often all sorts of reasons to be checking your parity. Do you want to do this one?
Okay. Wholesalers always say that they do not know who their retailers are, that they already closed them over, for example. But sub-retailers can be easily created every day. How do we deal with that?
I think it's the same answer.
Yeah.
The answer is not. You just can't focus on the place where the rate surfaces. You've got to focus on the relationship you've got with the wholesalers.
Yeah.
That's it, right? You just got to get them to operate in accordance with the agreements they made. And if they don't, you have to make very clear and specific changes to the way you work with them.
Yeah, that's just what I was struck by when researching this, is it just does not seem a sustainable business relationship to carry on. If you're always just dealing with the kind of the end result of it is the results on or the rates on a different OTA that you didn't expect it to be on, then you're not addressing the root cause of the issue.
Wait, when you say it's not sustainable,
yeah,
what I fear about this, despite us trying to suggest here are some ways of dealing with it, I think the status quo is most likely the sustainable outcome, because hotels don't seem to be getting a great grip of managing this. Some wholesalers I think are changing, and maybe the sustainable outcome would be 2 or 3 wholesalers, because there's consolidation going on, come out as being clearly whiter than white, clearly the best wholesalers to work with, and hotels vote with their feet and actually go and work with those wholesalers. But unless that happens, I suspect that we've got more of the same. Suggestions, RE brochures question, thank you. For brochures, you can use starting from prices, similar to the airline industry. That's a great one. Thank you very much, whoever said that. So the answer to the brochure question is say back to the wholesaler, for the brochures they can do a starting from price, which is just fine because the airline industry do it too.
Wholesalers are aware that they are undercutting and the problem it's causing. So will resisting their tactics do any good?
There are definitely hotels that we work with who have got much tougher and as a result had a bit of a breakthrough or improved the situation. I would say that's the minority. I think that most hotels try and deal with it because you've got a million things going on when you're running a hotel, and it's okay, I'm really angry with my wholesalers, I'm going to try and deal with it for a week, and then 6 months later it's I'm still angry at them, I'm going to try and deal with it. And because it's not the clear, concerted, strategic, like this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to run this program, and we're going to change all our contracts with our wholesalers, or like reduce them and then just have a couple and manage them off and out more rigorously. I think because hotels don't do that, that's why it carries on.
That would be very interesting to know actually, is if anyone on the webinar, is it one of your priorities for the year to come? We'd be really interested to know that.
The next question was, did we see more of a problem with independent or brand? We didn't, I don't think, get many responses from big brands.
There were a couple who felt, one I can remember, it was 2,000 plus rooms, a global brand, saying that they know it's an issue, but they're still dealing with it very manually. So it's just, so that it was only a couple of the responses, but it was interesting how similar their kind of just general thoughts on it were.
Yeah, and there are definitely, we work with hotel groups with 500 hotels, a couple of hundred hotels, so not the super big brands, but I know that the ones there, the mid-scale brands, they definitely have this issue.
I would say the majority of the respondents, I think the numbers are in the, I don't actually know if I have a copy of it somewhere, but in the actual survey we do have a breakdown of who responded. I'm sure Claire could pull out the figure of smaller versus larger hotel groups. So,
okay, good.
It's being handed to us.
Any others?
So yeah, the majority of hotels were sub 500 rooms, so it was small groups.
Does wholesale undercutting typically happen more internationally? And by that I assume that the retailers, the third-party retailers, it being international. I don't, to be honest, we didn't look into that. Definitely, what our experience, because we work globally, we definitely see this problem biggest in some Mediterranean Europe. It's like the big issue, and it's an even bigger issue in Asia. So Asia, it seems to be especially strong, and I think part of that reason, certainly from the hotels I speak to, is because C-Trip operate. Whilst C-Trip is an OTA on the surface, when a hotel, if a hotel were being undercut by a pass-on rate on Expedia, the hotel who has a relationship with Expedia would say, "Hey, come on, we have a deal here about undercutting," and Expedia would stick to that. However, when hotels we hear do that with C-Trip in Asia, often what C-Trip will say is, "Well, we're a platform. We operate like Amazon, where anybody can list their products and sell them to our guests." So as a result, C-Trip don't feel responsible and often don't then try and stamp out the same way that maybe Booking or Expedia might stop undercutting you if you gave them enough pressure.
Yeah.
I think we can only really have time for a couple more questions. I'm sorry if we don't get to them all. But just before, oh, here we go. No questions. We now have some worst offenders lists. I hope we've got some like good ones there as well. Okay. So I'm just going to read out. I don't know. They're not in any particular order. The worst offenders. We'll look at the data afterwards and put it in a blog. Which ones? So the worst offenders that we've got from people in the audience are Torrico, GTA, Hotel Beds, Jack Travel, Logi Travel, Roomd, Agoda, 7ids, 7ids, Hotels for Everyone, Scoosh.com. I'm not sure if some of those are some of those may be the retailers, not the wholesalers, but and then the good ones, Amoma, which came up twice. It's not a wholesaler, it's the retailer, as it gives a full refund. That's interesting because that's not my understanding. And Bonotel, which is good to hear. So thank you very much for responding. If you do have very strong feelings, or maybe there's someone else in your office who knows about which wholesalers are doing a good job and which ones are bad offenders, feel free to email us and we'll try and publish a bit of a breakdown of who we see, because I think we're just trying to open the lid here on an issue that we just keep on being told about and asked about by hotels on how to solve it. And we don't have all the answers, but we do what we can to share a bit best practice.
Exactly, it's starting the conversation. So these slides and the recording will be emailed around straight after the webinar. But yeah, do keep in touch, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. And if you just go to our blog, there'll be a wholesalers section, so you can see our previous writing on it as well. And keep your eye out for the next Spotlight report, because we're always looking for hotels to contribute to the research.
Yeah. And I'm going to just finish with a legal disclaimer, because what we really try to do is share some of the experiences and tactics that other hotels are using to deal with wholesalers. We are not condoning any specific behaviour, and what you choose to do and how you work with wholesalers is purely up to you. Obviously you have to balance the great benefit they bring if they're working in the way you expect them to, with the disadvantage if they're not. But that's it.
Okay, so thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you on the next one.
Yeah, and any feedback or any other topics or issues you'd like us to address, please let us know.
Cool. Thank you.